Oh, thank you so much, everyone, and greetings from late night in Aotearoa on the 23rd of April. There is a full moon high in the sky, and it is a very potent way to have a dialogue. This program, Cosmoimaginaries, which started in 2022 with Schumacher College, and some of the people on the call have been involved in the wider program, which was really investigating the polycultures of ecology and technology. We are now entering this new phase of working in Aotearoa with this call tonight called Practice as a Portal, Fresh Dialogues Between Earth and Outer Space with Willi Lempert, Daniela De Paulis, and Juan Salazar. The program started about rights of the moon and was inspired by the declarations of the rights of the moon, some work in Australia with involvement of one of Juan Francisco's colleagues, Alice Gorman, and now opening to this idea of more than human communication and life beyond Earth. We are connecting with the post-detection hub that has recently started in Scotland, in St Andrews, of which Daniela De Paulis and Willi Lempert are both researchers and members, to explore and hopefully expand this theme of post-detection SETI, which I shall break down a little bit. SETI being the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and post-detection meaning the process of what actually happens if a signal is received. We have a program that is taking shape over this year, working with different groups around the planet who are exploring some scenarios that the scenario working group in the hub is creating from many different creative approaches, sometimes immersive art and experiential projects, or a dinner party. Really many different ways to relate with some of the speculative thinking that is engaging SETI researchers. So to very briefly introduce the speakers today, artist Daniela De Paulis is also a licensed radio operator and has roles with the SETI Institute, the European Space Agency, the Italian Research Institute for Radio Astronomy, and very particularly this project that she is running at the moment, A Sign in Space, is really an incredibly ambitious project that has simulated an extraterrestrial message as part of a live performance, and has enormous public engagement. It has been covered in the media, many times, and it's actually really changing the landscape of what post-detection research is by engaging huge numbers of people, thousands of people really, trying to decode the signal together. And by doing so, she's creating real data about this completely speculative scenario. Then we have Professor Juan Francisco Salazar, an artist who makes radical and beautiful films, imagining different space futures, and a researcher and author, recently the editor of the Routledge Handbook of Social Studies of Outer Space. The bounty of creative research and research with the Australian Space Agency is really extraordinary. And then we have Dr. Willi Lempert, who is the assistant professor of anthropology at Bowdoin College, author of Dreaming Down the Track, Awakenings in Aboriginal Cinema, a work based on 30 months of ethnographic research in the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, and a fantastic proponent of how science fiction conveys imaginaries, and this deeply sensitive and really beautiful work, opening up film, particularly Indigenous artists and filmmakers, exploring very hopeful and different ways of engaging with the future. And he is also one of the authors of, I think, a really key text, the Indigenous Studies Working Group Statement by Sonia Atterley, David Shorter, and Kim Toolbear, which was published in 2021 in the American Indian Culture and Research Journal, but actually came through some work in 2018 at the Making Contact workshop with Breakthrough Listen. And it's an important document really flagging that SETI scientists need to do some work, taking up the bias in SETI and really understanding indigenous epistemologies. There's this phrase that travels with me from that document, that we need ethical guidelines that demonstrate utmost care in the event of making contact. And that sense of utmost care as a way of doing the work of SETI, I think is really vital and yet to be fully unpacked or faced. But I am seeing increasingly SETI research communities read this statement and the journal that came with it as well. So I think this cautious yet hopeful document will have a long life yet. It is fair to say that each of these speakers in different ways is certainly engaged in taking up the message of that Indigenous working group, and through real toil and creative work is changing the ecologies of outer space studies and SETI and knowledge cultures, really. And this conversation is informed by a really wide variety of researchers and communities that are making an urgent call to decolonize science and temper the ambitions of extractive space industries amidst ecological crises and multiplying conflicts. I don't think it can be stressed enough that we are in a particular moment of time marked by ecological breakdown and extreme geopolitical and societal turmoil, where it just simply could not be clearer what happens when imaginaries that project violent control ideologies and extractive technoscience just runs its course. Abject violence, inequality, and destruction of living contexts is devastatingly visible in April 2024. And as we speak today, all through the United States, university campuses are in protest, a situation, I think, which is really very similar to the late 1960s. The knowledge structures are straining at their limits, and the protests for the rights and sovereignty of Palestinian people are fundamentally reshaping the university system. So this conversation takes place in the midst of this really appalling and grave moment. And yet there is really enormous breakthroughs too. And at Venice Art Festival, we have artists from Oceania winning all the main prizes, and this is really incredible to see. I just want to read 2 sentences from the winner of the Golden Lion, Archie Moore, whose exhibition Kith and Kin for the Australia Pavilion has won the prize. He said on accepting, "As the water flows through the canals of Venice to the lagoon and then to the Adriatic Sea, it then travels to the oceans and to the rest of the world, enveloping the continent of Australia, connecting us all here on Earth. Aboriginal kinship systems include all living things from the environment in a larger network of relatedness. The land itself can be a mentor or a parent to a child. We are all one and share a responsibility of care to all living things now and into the future." And this is important. This is important that this is being said on the world stage. We come together this morning, this evening, this lunchtime, emphasizing life-giving practices that lift up the work that feeds awareness of a diversity of communication contexts and cultures, and respects ecological value and the life of beings, human and more than human, to learn together about deepening approaches to outer space futures and the search for life beyond Earth. So with that, I think we will go into Willi Lempert's introduction to his work.
Hey everyone, my name is Willi Lempert. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at Bowdoin College, and I'm very excited to be here today, zooming in on a crisp morning in coastal Maine in the Northeast US. Thank you, Kate, for organizing this. I'm thrilled to learn from and engage with other panelists. Um, so my current research engages the search for extraterrestrial intelligence along with some other outer space projects. It's informed by my previous and ongoing research with Indigenous communities in Australia and North America, with people who make futurist media. So in this opening, I'll briefly say a little bit about my background and then overview some of what I've been thinking about regarding what is often taken for granted in discussions of outer space, aliens, and intelligence. So as mentioned, I participated in a working group for SETI around Indigenous studies, where we were asked to write a working paper on what SETI might be missing in their approach and framework. And this included Kim Tallbear, David Shorter, and Sonia Adelaide. That was really foundational for me. And out of that experience, I started writing on historical analogs, recontextualizing past, present, and future outer space popular imaginaries. So today, I'm especially excited to discuss the role of creative practice and storytelling. I've written a bit about the role of native science fiction films that imagine engagement with ET beings quite differently, interacting in ways that do not project or assume the recreation of historical settler colonialism or resource extraction colonialism. And as a side note about that, I really highly recommend the 4-minute animated film by Lisa Jackson called The Visit. I think it's a fantastic example of something that it's easily findable online to see something along those lines. I'm a big fan of the Sign in Space project, and engaging in a workshop around that has been one of the highlights of the space journey over the past few years. But for my thoughts today, I want to lay out some of the more the foundational SETI scientist assumptions upon which storytelling about intelligent life beyond Earth is often built upon. I'll suggest that these frameworks are not as self-evident as they might seem, and that one particular shift could transform what it would mean to conceptually and ethically engage with them. These will be well understood by fellow panelists, though perhaps less obvious for some viewers. I'll begin this quickly by considering ontological frameworks of the universe. Ontology is the branch of metaphysics that distilled is essentially about the nature of being. And the vast majority of outer space projects, from Apollo to SpaceX, are framed through scientific materialism in which everything essentially consists of matter and its interactions. Materialism is so dominant that the current outer space projects within them that it's rarely even acknowledged, essentially the water in the fish tank. However, if we took a big step back, it is worth noting that it represents a highly unusual ontology in the context of human societies across time and space. So to broadly connect and even overly generalize, just for the purposes of this brief discussion, I'll contrast materialism with animism. So the vast majority of human societies fall within the many, many variations of comprehending the universe and everything within it as fundamentally animated with being. This takes on numerous and diverse forms, though at a broad level, it stands in contrast with the inanimacy of materialism that has come to dominate space discourse. To provide a sense of both the implications and relevance of ontological bases for thinking beyond Earth, I'll briefly overview 4 central tenets of SETI and the implications of centering an animated universe when considering them. For the sake of clarity and brevity, I'll refer to extraterrestrial intelligent beings simply as ETIs. So tenet number 1, very familiar to folks, the Fermi paradox. Posed at a conference lunch by Enrico Fermi in 1950, his paradox, also known as the Great Silence, is often framed as the most fundamental challenge to the existence of intelligent life in the universe. It suggests that if just one ETI species began expanding outwardly at a relatively moderate speed, they would reach the edge of the solar system, galaxy, and universe in a relatively short period of time. Yet, this assumes that aliens would be compelled to expand ever outward from their home. Debates on Fermi's paradox tend to take for granted a behavior that is exceedingly rare in the history of our own species, the impulse to endlessly expand. Since expansionism is so rare, what if we were to make a singular change to the premise of Fermi's paradox and instead assume that ETIs, even and especially those with high levels of technological complexity, inhabit a home area, live relatively sustainably, and have little desire to limitlessly broaden their territory? This is indeed the case for past and present indigenous societies on Earth, broadly speaking, who not only live in a place, but are also of and in relation to it. So, tenet number 2, the Drake equation, developed by Frank Drake in 1961, the Drake equation is a mathematical formula that estimates the number of ETI societies in which communication is possible. Science journalist Michael Lemonick even declared it to be the second most important equation of the 20th century, eclipsed only by Einstein's E equals mc squared. For example, one of its variables, if you have a look at it, labeled FC, it refers to the fraction of ETIs that release detectable signals of their existence into space. For signals to be picked up by radio telescopes and other instruments, they probably have to be intentionally transmitted. Yet, one might ask, where does this impulse spring from? In a materialist universe, many adherents of SETI describe humans as occupying a solitary existence as the lonely and flickering light of consciousness within a vast expanse that seems frighteningly devoid of life. However, from the many points of view of an animated ontological framework, there is no existential crisis, as humans already live in places saturated with vivid and interconnected relationships with animals, plants, and objects within a cosmos that is full of places and beings that are neither outer nor alien. They are relations, including ancestors and creation beings. Tenet number 3, the Great Filter. Proposed by Robin Hanson, the Great Filter represents a response to Fermi's paradox that draws upon the Drake equation. Suggesting that there is no evidence for ETIs, it assumes that there must be a powerful limiting factor or filter at some point before the final stage of developing intelligence. It suggests that endless expansion is not just a human quality, but one of life itself, and one which leads to a glorious immortality, though crucially, this filter has a limited amount of time through which humans or ETIs can pass through it. The goal of making it through the Great Filter has been taken up by a generation of scientists, futurists, and of course, celebrity billionaire space aficionados such as Elon Musk. However, within the framework of an animated universe, endless growth not only overshoots environmental carrying capacities, but it also deeply disrupts and harms non-human animated beings and spaces. From this worldview, perhaps trying to ascend through the Great Filter may operate similarly to what historian Edward Tenner describes as a revenge effect, in which the consequences of a technological goal are in opposition to its creator's intentions. There may in fact be numerous ETIs throughout the universe, with the actual filter being the sustained avoidance of the expansionist behavior that Hansen celebrates. It is also worth considering who the Great Filter excludes, namely every non-expansionist human society, past and present. Finally, tenet number 4, the Kardashev scale. Developed by Nikolai Kardashev in 1964, this scale classified civilizations into types based on their level of energy usage. Type 0 is understood as harnessing limited power from organic-based raw materials. Type 1, the full solar power of a planet. Type 2, the total power of a sun through a Dyson sphere. And Type 3, the power of every star in a galaxy. However intended, the creation of a value system for relating expansionism with intelligence is easily adapted into frameworks with hierarchical existential value. Indeed, prominent futurists use this as a model for elevating particular aspects of humanity seemingly required to pass through the Great Filter's Type 1 threshold, beyond which a sort of cosmic Valhalla is imagined to await. This model implies that the vast majority of societies and nations are designated for Type 0 stagnation and elevates a narrow set of Western values and technologies. Other models might alternatively value long-term sustainability, integration within one's ecosystem, or emergent collective intelligence, as expressed by forests, fungi, and insects. So typologies such as the Kardashev scale matter greatly, not because we are necessarily likely to encounter ETIs, but because of what they reveal and reinforce regarding how we treat fellow humans and other sentient beings here on Earth. Ultimately, the only limit to limitless expansion is that of the universe itself. Considering such an endless appetite for growth, one might ask, how could any amount of space ever be enough for such an interstellar society? So in conclusion, for anyone who might be watching, I think that as we all continue to explore questions regarding extraterrestrial spaces and beings, that it is important to consider how our very questions provide mirrors that reflect our values, as well as how we might push ourselves to ask different questions in new and old ways. So I'm excited to hear everyone else's thoughts and any questions that might come up here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Willi. Daniela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Kate. Also, thank you for the very timely statements you made. I find really important that we keep talking to each other, especially in these challenging times. It's really something that should be addressed more often in all conferences. I just got back from a conference in Durham, which was wonderful, really interesting. It brought together SETI researchers from around the world, but somehow the topic of current geopolitical situation was not addressed. So I think in the field of humanities, we are, I think, privileged that we can do that without somehow causing steering any concern. I'm going to present, I'm going to give an overview of the topic you raised through your thoughtful questions, Kate. Through my practice, I thought it would be interesting to see how each of us converging into SETI research has a very unique trajectory, and I'm really interested in hearing each one of you of how eventually your practice and theoretical work landed you onto SETI research. So I will try and give an overview of how that worked for me, what was the thought process behind it. And especially in SETI, I think it's very important to start mapping the trajectory we all go through because the field is becoming increasingly interdisciplinary, and so we all converge without sometimes knowing each other's trajectory. So my background is live performance art. My background is also in contemporary dance. I really owe a lot to my background as a dancer. I worked and studied mostly with wonderful movement artists over the years, and the knowledge and really the knowledge of participatory practice, really, that I gained through working and studying with these masters of movement is something that I greatly treasure, and I use in my art practice of today as well. My work is mostly intangible. I don't create objects so much. It's mostly invisible and also immaterial. My instruments for making work, which I will define mostly conceptual art, is a radio telescope. So I had the opportunity to work with some really fantastic instruments over the years, including the Green Bank telescope. I'm also artist in residence at the SETI Institute, which really allowed me to delve very deeply into the field of SETI. And I'm also part of the SETI committee of the International Academy of Astronautics, and I've been part of this committee for the past 9 years. So I'm quite familiar with the main questions addressed in SETI research and some of the key players. And I also collaborated with the team at the Allen Telescope Array, the various telescopes in Italy, and also amateur telescopes. So I used some of these wonderful instruments like the Bochum antenna in Germany and the Dwingelo telescope in the Netherlands, where everything started for me in terms of expanding my work onto outer space. So as a dancer, I started working with space of the body, the space of the stage, the space of the performance venue. Eventually that expanded onto the urban space. And this concept of space kept growing and growing. and inevitably led me to work with outer space. So this direction of my work started in 2009 when I implemented radio technologies into my artistic practice. And this really allowed me to expand my concept of theater to the cosmic scale. And one particular project, Optics, which I started in 2009, was really, I think, the work that allowed me to create global networks, bringing together people from different fields, and especially the audience. I really enjoy, I feel very gratified in working with people from all walks of life, all around the world. And this performance really allowed me to do so. It's basically an event during which we stream images reflected by the surface of the moon in real time. And during this event, we have also panel conversation among people from different fields, the general public, artists, and so on. And over the years, I've seen images from people from all over the world, different cultures. It was really a great opportunity for me to cement this global network with people, with radio amateurs, scientists, artists, and more. And especially my work with Astronomers Without Borders, I would say I would really credit them for really allowing me to expand my perception of my work into the global scale, into the cosmic scale. So the motto of Astronomers Without Borders is one people, one sky. So we really try to unify the people of the world through looking at the sky and reminding us that we are really part of one planet and trying to overcome possible conflicts through astronomy, and in this case also through art. And in the following up project, Cognitive in Space, I addressed more directly the question of SETI, because we transmit the brain activity of people watching a film in virtual reality. So this brain activity is transmitted into space, while the participants watch a film of the Earth seen from space. So through this project also, I started really creating global networks of neuroscientists, radio astronomers, SETI researchers, radio operators. So it was the very first project where I started also using SETI more explicitly. And also it was very much informed by the overview effect. So trying to reinforce this concept that we are part of one planet where all human and geographical climatic events are interconnected. So this Cognitive Space, which is a work I presented between 2013 and 2018, so it's quite old by now, but still it carries really its legacy into my current work. And it was very experiential. So people were first going through the national park that surrounded the stage of the event, which was the Dwingelo telescope, where people could send their brain activity into space. And I collected the reaction of people after the experience and how they felt by connecting more intimately with the cosmos. So a lot of my work is really about creating these personal as well as global connection between humans and the cosmos. And I addressed some of these questions about SETI and cognitive space in several papers. I didn't attach them to the link sent, but I will, please ask me if you would like a copy of the papers that I published between 2019 and 2021 about cognitive space. And finally, I will briefly mention a sign in space. I won't go into details because there are already several talks about this project online. So I'm happy to discuss this in the conversation. But this was a more concrete stage in a simulation of the reception of an extraterrestrial signal. So it is a SETI project, but actually for me, the driving question was, how would we create meaning of a message or even a signal actually coming from an extraterrestrial civilization? How can we as humankind, especially now as a collection of complex societies interconnected by technology, how can we possibly make meaning of something so radically alien? And so it was really a humanist question that drove this project that is anyway really filled with technology. So I brought together SETI researchers from various observatories, research centers that typically don't collaborate with each other simply because there is no opportunity or collective project that brings them together. And also I wanted to create a scenario that could be different from the one presented in the media, like in the major media, like films that have shaped our imaginary of what could be a first contact scenario, such as, of course, contact and arrival, for example, or even the three-body problem. So these are all works that imagine an event where the signal coming from an extraterrestrial civilization would be tackled by a small group of researchers. And my question was, what would happen if instead we shared the data, intentionally share the data with the general public? How would the general public make sense, give meanings to such a signal, such a message? There is a lot more to say. This project has been developed over the course of 4 years. So as I said, there is a lot of technology behind it, starting with a test in 2021, continuing with series of tests throughout the months leading to eventually the live event on 24 May 2023. This is still online, so can still be watched. I will finish here and happy to discuss this further if needed. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Daniela. It is such an experiment with the commons. And just one question before I hand to Juan Francisco. Has anyone figured it out yet?
No, not yet. No, they are still decoding the message. So at the moment, I am showing at various exhibitions around the world the various interpretations because they've been extremely interesting. And I think now the focus of the project for me is really to highlight the incredible human resource and creativity that has been really blooming as a result of this project. And give time to people to eventually find the message we conceived. And if not, it doesn't matter so much, actually.
Oh, that uncertainty is like another level of realism, which does not feature in the films or the narratives, but the struggle to decode, which is actually not yet working. We can't make it into an Eye of the Tiger training montage. We're just stuck inside it. It's really interesting. Thank you so much, Juan Francisco. Thank you so much. It would be great to hear your 10 minutes.
Thank you, Kate, for this beautiful invitation to converse with you all. And it's very nice to share this conversation with Daniela, with whom I had the absolute pleasure to meet a couple of years ago in Europe. And I really admire your work a lot. And also with Willi, whose work I have been reading for some years now, and they're very inspirational. And I also know, Almendras, a little bit of your work as well through Future Earth. So it's interesting connections throughout the world. I am in Sydney, on Wangal country, where I live. It's about 10 p.m. It was a beautiful day today. I was spending time with the flying foxes. There's a big camp of flying foxes around where I live. And I want to acknowledge also your introduction, Kate, and the moment that we are going through for the last 199 days and 75 years and 100 years, and how the dismantling of Zionism has become a global struggle for decolonization. And I think I want to pay respects for all the work that has been going to support Palestinian resistance for the last 6 months, but as we know, for the last century. And on that note, I wanted to shout to the Palestine Space Institute that was created not so long ago as a pioneering and visionary think tank, doing some interesting work at the forefront of space ethics and responsible uses of outer space. My interest in outer space is not around SETI, but more around environmental justice and decolonization of imaginaries. So I think that having an institute dedicated to or committed to decoupling, defense systems from space, safeguarding space technologies and application, and promoting demilitarization of space is very important, as we know how space technologies, including SETI, are embedded and embroidered with a lot of the war machinery going on around the world. And I'm also linked in the past year or so with the Just Space Alliance, and there's a workshop coming up in June around environmental justice and trying to draw the connections about the risk of damaging space environments in ways that we have damaged Earth environments, and questions around environmental justice and equitably distribution of both costs and benefits in the ways that we are conceiving the uses of outer space environments. So what I wanted to discuss today is a very long project, and I'm going to see if I can quickly share some slides. So the way I arrived to this field of practice as a filmmaker and as an interdisciplinary researcher with a background in anthropology and in visual anthropology was with a concern around what I have been calling a poetics of tomorrowing, the poesis, the practices of making and unmaking different tomorrows, and concerns about different radical alternative ways of developing futurisms. And there's been a plethora of work coming out in the last decade, of course, and many of you have been working in that area. And for me, looking at outer space, not necessarily as an object of study, but more as a method, has been quite interesting and useful. And mixing a range of traditional methods like ethnography or visual documentary or experimental film or video art, but also with work around the politics of citation or citational practices and playlisting, creating playlists and making and sharing playlists, and different engagements with forms of weirding, queering, story working, etc. So I think my practice as a filmmaker around outer space has to do with that experimentation. And what I wanted to talk today is that two big projects that in one sense is one project, but they're separated by a decade. One is the film Nightfall on Gaia, which was released in 2015. It premiered in the CPH Docs Festival in Copenhagen in 2015. And one that is about to be released this year, I hope. It's in late stages of post-production, called Cosmoimaginaries. We have a fine cut. We screened that fine cut last week. So we plan to finish it in the next couple of months. And in these two films, it's a collaboration with an important colleague that we have been collaborating for some time now. Her name is Victoria Hunt. She's an Australian-born Maori performance artist, born in Australia, but with ancestral affiliations to Ngati Ohomarangi, Te Arawa, and Rongo Whakata in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we started working together in 2014 in that film, Nightfall on Gaia. We created a fictional character, a fabulated character out of ethnographic interviews, but also following her own journey as an artist, learning about her whakapapa, her genealogy as a person born in Australia, and reconnecting with her Maori heritage. So she was at the beginning of that process 10 years ago, and we created this character called Shue Nun, who is a Maori astrobiologist in a fabulated Antarctic research station in 2048, where she had been doing work in preparation for the first crewed mission to the moons of Europa. The film goes in and out of between fiction and fact, between documentary, experimental film, and science fiction, sort of creating a tension between these genres and trying to push these artificial boundaries between Western modes of storytelling that sharply distinguish between fact and fiction, and trying to engage with earlier ancient but also contemporary modes of indigenous and other non-Western forms of storytelling, where fact and fiction and fabulation can be blurred. It was a film that was not only about speculating about possible futures in outer space based on real plans by NASA, by Jet Propulsion Center, by the European Space Agency, but also it was a homage to ways of inhabiting the Antarctic and making the Antarctic home, sort of the everyday life of people living in the Antarctic, making themselves at home in the ice, of living in a quasi-extraterrestrial landscape environment where no human population had lived permanently up until recently, and new forms of subjectivity and sociality that emerged in these transient populations in the Antarctic. So they stay there for 2 or 3 years. So I was working in civilian settlements in the Antarctic Peninsula, where mostly Chilean, Korean, Russian, Chinese, Uruguayan, Argentinian, Brazilian research stations. And I always felt that film was left unfinished in some way, that my interests in exploring with speculative film practices, I wanted to continue, but it took me another 10 years to reconnect back to the story of Shue Nun. And it just came out of a dream that I had in 2021 when I was starting the new film, and the new film was going to be completely different. And in that dream, a path was open to reconnect with Victoria Hunt. And we have made this collaboration that is set in multiple temporalities. So one of the things that I'm quite interesting also is in questions of decolonizing time, and questions about decolonizing not only about territory and space, but also important questions about decolonizing space-time. So the new story is set in multiple temporalities that are parallel, not necessarily linear. Mars in 2051 and the Atacama Desert in 2023, 2024. And the reason is to make a strong argument about environmental justice using a speculative story set in Mars, where Shue Nun is alone again. I had a friend that criticized my work in very interesting way, saying, "Did you watch Robinson Crusoe a lot when you were a kid?" And I said, "No." "Oh, okay, just asking." But she's alone again in Mars, reflecting about new ways of inhabiting Mars that is not about settling and colonizing Mars, but creating a new form of inhabitation. And we have been exploring more of Maori sky knowledge and Maori different stories of stars and engagements, around Matariki and the lack, not being able to see the moon. But the big metaphor there is the struggle of the defense of land and water in the Atacama Desert. So going back to where I started, the idea of environmental justice. How are we going to take care of space environments when we have completely failed to take care of Earth environments in a really horrible way? The Atacama Desert has, there's no really time to explain a lot, but there's three parts of the desert. The highlands, where the Atacameño Licanantay people have lived for over 13,000 years, are defending their land and water against the encroachment of mining companies, which are not new. That has started over 100 years ago. But now it's the lithium companies. There's two big lithium companies. So the whole global transition to net zero, it's dependent quite a lot on lithium batteries, and most of the lithium production comes from this lithium triangle in the north of Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. So the discourse is in a lot of the communities, are we to be sacrificed for the world to transition to net zero? And the problem is that lithium in Chile is in the brine, not in the rock, in the water. So there's huge extractions of water to produce lithium. And the other big extractivist industry is the astronomical industry that has set up big astronomical centers like ALMA and many others on indigenous territorial claims, and has created a lot of tension by restricting movement and access to sacred sites and sites for animals and other spaces. And then in the coast is where there's a lot of coal plants, thermoelectric plants where the lithium is being shipped to China, to Europe, to the US, to other parts of the world. So I'm using those two ancient deserts, the desert on Mars and the Atacama Desert, as some kind of beacons of resistance, of struggle, of environmental justice, trying to link environmental justice on Earth and on space. And I think that's pretty much my 10 minutes. So thank you.
We have 30 minutes to connect and to dialogue before we take wider questions, connecting to this invitation in the Indigenous Studies Group statement, where the stress is upon this sense of making contact with utmost care and an awareness of film and story and art practices and creative practices as being able to hold things like care, this relational quality we have, and really noticing that in many of the scientific meetings that I attend, the care is not legible because it can't really be just scooped up and put as a reference inside a science paper, alongside other references, because ultimately it is deeper than that. It's disrupting the whole frame of things. And, this illegibility really gets us into some quite extreme tangles. Scientists often talk about competition being very useful, and competition, makes everyone play at their highest level but you might win some things, but you lose a lot. And ultimately, it seems like we're willing to lose the world for this. And I wonder how, with creative practice, with creative research, with, you know, alternative emerging work methods, cultural methods, how you see the possibility of embodying care and bringing it into a form of legibility where these structures of technoscience might be able to do something more with it. I'm not sure if that made sense, but I hope that I hope something came through that one.
Can I instantly
Yeah.
follow up on what you just said, Kate? I think this is so relevant. So in performance art, as we know, there is a tradition of this type of collaboration between, for example, artists and the general public, and in general, trying to overcome barriers of any kind. Especially, I remember my practice with improvisation practices in dance. They're really a great example of how you can potentially expand the performance stage or dancing space, however you want to call it, to anyone who is in the room. So anyone, regardless of their abilities or their knowledge of dance movement, they can join, they can introduce the narrative into the story. And this is a form of co-creation and horizontal, so there is no hierarchy. And this is such a great training for really appreciating the importance of each person in society, in the world. And when I was at this conference also last week, we had, there were a few people coming from Iran, for example. And they told me the story of what it took for them to reach the conference place. And it was really, really, I mean, deeply unsettling to know that human beings have to go through such hurdles in their daily life because of the current geopolitical situation and world leaders creating an unlivable world for human beings. So I think more than any other moment, at least in my life, I feel like through creative practices and really transferring some of our knowledge onto the science field, and especially SETI is especially permeable to these, because SETI is an interdisciplinary science by definition. So I feel like the field is very permeable to influences from other specialisms. And I think we have the ability, probably even power to somehow inspire these scientists to look at their work also and use their work in a more engaged, socially, humanly engaged form. And really, at the moment, especially at this moment, when we are facing so many challenges, it's really important to continue bridging cultures instead of creating barriers amongst cultures, and especially bridging connections amongst people, because they are more often the victims of what's going on, regardless of their locations, or they are really not responsible for most of what's going on.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. And it's a great question about care. And Daniela, you had mentioned the three-body problem. And this is a series I absolutely love, and I think it's, endlessly interesting. And of course, going mainstream right now, and its answer to Fermi's paradox, without really spoiling anything, it specifically is essentially that there's this dark forest theory of cosmic violence where ETIs are in a fight to the death, including humans, and hiding is the only viable option. And within that framework, there's no bandwidth for care or really anything else when colonial violence is imminent. And so that's why I think, it's really important for non-violent imaginaries that provide the space for care in relation to space and hold it central. I mentioned Lisa Jackson's short film, The Visit. Nana Becker also has a great short film called The Sixth World. And there's so much wonderful science fiction by Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler, of course, many others. And there's also moments, of course, of astronauts showing care. Like The Diary of a Space Zucchini is one of my favorite things. It's this beautiful poetic caring of an ISS astronaut taking care of the zucchini from the zucchini's point of view. Who's really, serious about the zucchini mattering in a way that is beyond science and just sort of the technical components. And the point about practice here, I think, is key. So, like Michael Oman Reagan has this great meditation on outer space, and it's short and it's a way of engaging in something that's not simply conceptual. So, anyways, I think it's one of the most crucial questions about all of these related topics. And like, has been mentioned, about current, events and beyond, often it doesn't feel like there's a time for care because things are so overwhelmed by the specter of violence. But that is, absolutely essential to create that space.
Well, I'm not sure how to add, as the conversation is quite complex and going in different directions. The question about nonviolence, I agree with Willi. However, you cannot have nonviolence when there's no justice. So you cannot have peace when there's no justice. So I think justice comes first, whether it's for people, for environment. So I think that's a driving force for me to think about space. And my apologies that I don't work in SETI, but in this new film, Cosmographies, we have spent months and months developing dialogue and images about how the astronaut cares in Mars for the rocks, for the whirlwinds, for the plants that they are growing. So it's been a really important inspiration, as Willi is saying, the lack of a narrative of care in many of science fiction films. The other thing I wanted to say is that in the geopolitics of knowledge production and circulation, there's an overwhelming spread of science fiction coming from the global north, even indigenous science fiction coming from the US, that it's circulated as global when it's not global. It's connected to territory, to specific stories of the stars. But because of the geopolitics of how knowledge circulates and the prominence of the US in academia, so part of my work has also to reject also that work coming of the US, not because it's not important in itself, and I do cite it a lot, but why do we always need to, follow, academic work or artistic praise work from the US? So I have some reticence. I'm hesitant always of expanding from the US as if it was global. There's so many science fictions creeping out from the fissures of this mediascape that are so interesting, and I'm sure, Willi, you have read a lot of them. And I think it's important that those narratives and voices also get in the mix. Otherwise, we end up reproducing the same circulation of knowledge, production and circulation. And going back to the question about that Daniela was saying of the importance of inspiring scientists, I agree as well. I think the role of art in inspiring scientists, but for me it's more challenging scientists rather than inspiring, and engaging with scientists that have an intention to do science otherwise. So in both my films, I have collaborated with a lot of scientists, geologists, glaciologists, microbiologists, but instead of using my work to inspire them, I prefer to develop a collaboration, a cooperation in which a common narrative can emerge from that cooperation, collaboration, rather than inspiring them. I think that's not inspiring for me to think it in that way. So I'm not trying to put words into Daniela, of course. So Daniela, please don't feel like that. But it just kept resonating about whether the role of our practices should only be to inspire the scientists, but also challenging. And I think you do a lot of that, Daniela. You challenge a lot of the scientists that you collaborate with your art. So yeah, I think, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just responding to some of the conversations. So thank you.
I feel that so much, that your work, Daniela, is challenging, because in some sense there were these energies of minimizing what creative research could do, and then your project came along and it was just so huge. It is fantastic.
I think you raise a very important topic, Juan, by, I think, differentiating inspiration and challenging the scientists. I think that's a very relevant topic. I feel like we have to also, so yes, indeed, when I collaborate with the scientists, as people who know my practice, it is really a co-creation. So we do work together. But also, I think realistically, I feel like I get to participate in many scientific conferences. And in these scientific conferences, there is a very established kind of language and behavior. And to try and be challenging in these contexts can really put people off. Rather, I think you need to use kind of a different way of a different communication spectrum. In this case, I think the inspiration tool can be really quite powerful, because if by presenting your work and showing that your work resonates with what they're doing, and simply giving their work a more human aspect that perhaps they don't emphasize too much in their presentations, I think that really literally inspires them to see so much more about the work, really locate their work in a much broader field. So in this sense, I use the word inspire. But I do agree with you that when you co-create with the scientists, it's important that you raise questions from different perspectives, and you learn, you challenge each other, etc. But also I think because in this moment we are witnessing so many fields suddenly coming together in one room with different historical backgrounds, different languages, different methodologies, literally different academic knowledge, not only knowledge, but also really methods. And so it's a very, I think it's becoming quite crucial for to become quite empathic in really opening dialogues rather than imposing maybe or necessarily creating friction or being critical necessarily.
Yeah, I think you have a very strong point, and I agree. And I have worked for a lot of my career from that perspective, of changing the language or the spectrum of the communication, as you call it, to find common values, shared values, and move forward. So I totally agree with you, and I like working in that way. However, sometimes I think it's also important the other way, because it's always the artist that is making the concession to change the spectrum, and it's not often that it works both ways. So that's the concern I have. And as you were talking, I was thinking whether there's a relationship between inspire and conspire. You can conspire with scientists as well, and I think Timothy Choi has a beautiful work around, I think, if I remember correctly, that the etymology of conspire is to breathe together, like when you're very close together and you're breathing together very closely. So maybe that inspiration that you're talking about is also conspiring with scientists, towards, new narratives as well, rather than just being critical. But I still value the role of critique, because it's not the science per se that I'm concerned. It's the operations of science, the operations, the lack of sometimes democratization of science as a machine, where the problems lies for me, rather than the discovery of science. Science is the most beautiful thing. And in the new film, I'm working with a geologist that studies meteorites in the Atacama Desert, has the most beautiful stories about meteorites and the exchange of flows of material between Earth and space, and a marine ecologist who works with rotifers and that can clone themselves, females to females, and have basically make males redundant, and they are just cloning females. So she uses that as a metaphor in her own life as a scientist with political concerns. So anyways, thank you, Daniela.
Just a quick comment on both of those things. Daniela and Juan, I was thinking about how it's interesting because in my experience, like with SETI, for example, in Berkeley, in person, like there's so many SETIs. There's many different people with different views, and often the younger graduate students might be very open and not even push back against some things that one might imagine that they would. But they're enmeshed within their entire power structure, and there's this sort of generational kind of set of power forces, and um, yeah, so I found that really interesting, and I wonder if you all have noticed some similar things. And to the previous point about the US centric um, focus and the way that knowledge production moves around the world, I think that's a great point. Um, in my mind, it often goes to the Zambian space program, which you all would know about, which is this incredible space program. And Ngoloso, the leader of this program, would often say things like the only thing different about our space program is that we don't have all this money based on colonial dispossession. The imagination, the training, and all those other things are there. So I think it's an important point.
Interesting, because I always think of that space project, that Kanye West song called Spaceship, where he likens the experience of blue collar labor and the desire for something other than that to be akin to a desire to go into another space realm, which is a description of what it means to be entwined in a whole body of experience of constraint, where the desire for, what are the impositions of the corporation's desire to do X, Y, and Z that lives in the body of somebody. And so somebody who works at Starbucks or at KFC or at whatever, and you can see that it's hard for them to smile, it's because the imperative is in the body. And to imagine a world besides that is to literally feel like, as he says, I wish I could buy me a spaceship and fly past the sky, And the only thing that comes to mind for me right now is a line from this poem that says, alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. And I was just thinking about how I don't know much about my gut biome, but there's a part of me that kind of aspires to be healthy. And I don't know much about how I can take care of that. And there's a part of me that doesn't know much about the microbiome in the soil. But then there's a part of me that desires to see green and to be in lush spaces. And then there's a part of me that doesn't know about how to walk and swim in an ocean because I'm terrified of stonefish, these thorns in the Indian Ocean. But yet there's the thing about being in a beautiful beach and you think, oh, this should be lovely. But then because I don't know what's happening, I'm terrified. And for me, there's this thing about in the minute routine every day of encountering a myriad of things that we do not know that actually creates situations where these minor little things that we meet here and there actually coalesce into a sense of how do I encounter and relate with something that is totally outside of what I meet every day. And so to meet the unknown every day is to rehearse meeting the unknown at a time when it will really matter. And so for me, I am just beginning to see how my relationship with a stonefish is essentially me experimenting with what it would actually mean to meet with an alien, for example. Because it's the same thing. The body is going to come together and be like, oh shit, I'm scared. Oh, I'm excited. Oh, I'm worried. Oh, I want to protect myself. But yet the means by which we make relationship with how we meet that moment is in the mundane. And so I come back here to this place of what is it that I meet every day that I do not know, and how do I respond to it? And in this way of this line where this person says alertness is the hidden discipline of man for familiarity, in what ways is my alertness primed to see certain things and not others? And in what ways is this alertness ready to meet with something that it has never met before? And so that's what I'm curious about as I listen to this conversation and imagining landscapes that are beyond. But yet there is a chance to experiment with what does it mean to actually make contact, because contact is here, you know. So that's kind of what I'm sitting with as I listen. And I kind of feel sad. Okay, I cannot stay longer because I need to go and make contact with another world. So I will love and leave you here. But thank you very much.
Thank you. So rich, so poetic, and actually fundamentally getting to the root and the heart of the unknown, and you know how embodied communication capacities can meet what we don't know. I think that something that, and I will land this call very soon, but just to say that in, say, Daniela's participatory work, there is so much ecological sensing that goes on. And so through relations with other people, you meet others, you meet yourself in ways you've never met yourself before. You know, the whole idea of the self and other becomes entangled and weird and transformative. And I think it's of real value. I think it's of value to seek to name it. Of course, we have the poets and the artists who who name this variability of ecological life, very well through centuries, millennia. And it does remind me a little of Valerie Olson's work, and she speaks about nocturnal practices and just attending to those moments of non-clarity, and noticing where science often generalizes about richly differentiated experience or qualities, and somehow in art, in film, in stories, you have the integrated whole weirdness of relationality living together. But I do think there is work to be done to have this real communication across the disciplines, which certainly is what the Post-Detection Hub in Scotland has its aim at, and this sense that it's going to look at process, post-detection as process rather than the one event. And then you open the whole realm of complex, messy, totally funky, weird ecological life. And in the participatory projects, I noticed that the body is involved in all its multimodal being, and you can see people falling through themselves. They fall through the kind of solid perceptions they had built up, and that is transformative. So I just really wanted to encourage this creative transmutation work and say how important it is. There's one invitation I have too, because I have not even identified the reason I have this this background behind me is because this guy here is Comet 12P Pons Brooks, which is otherwise known as the Devil Comet, and is in the sky right now as we talk, which was very exciting to me, because part of the practices we've been doing in Cosmoimaginaries is creative practices, but also dreaming practices. So we have for about 7 years been dreaming with comets at the peak of their moment where they're closest to Earth, and creating a space to share the dreams we have that night. Who knows how we could relate to each other or to the more than human, but maybe we could be more playful. We must close because it's pretty late for Juan Francisco. It is certainly late for other people, but if anybody has a burning thing they would like to say before we close the call, of course you are welcome to.
I just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to see you and converse with you. As I said at the beginning, I really admire your work a lot. And I thought that Robert's intervention was very deep and meaningful. And like him, I'm also terrified of outer space, but I'm terrified of what we are doing in outer space. I think we are the alien going out rather. So I'm not terrified of any other civilization or anything. I'm terrified of us and how we are planning to go mining our way through the solar system is what terrifies me the most. So, yep.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I agree. And the way we celebrate being a bully society, why would we celebrate this? But thank you so much. Thank you for being here. It's like incredibly deep, and I wish we could go deeper. And so good to see your face, Almendra.
Thank you. This is like mind-blowing for me. I wasn't prepared at all for this kind of conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I think it has so many similarities with the work of On-Seeds that are so small, so uncertain, and we are really interested in opening the space for communication, and but it's so hard to listen from them, as I feel it's hard to listen from this post detection. I think it works for seeds too, for the very tiny and for the giant, and I think well, there are so many pathways of working together and communicating and embracing this uncertainty and this fear too. I agree with Juan Francisco, and thank you so much. It's really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. It is great to see you, and I wish you a really happy day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.